Hey everybody, this is Mike. Welcome back to the shop. Please don't turn off or switch to another video. You're not seeing things. There's no technical difficulties. Yes, this is in fact a Ford in my shop. Those of you that know me will find the humor in that. Anyway, this project belongs to a gentleman who purchased this recently. It's a 2018 Ford F-150, two-wheel drive. It has the 5.0 liter V8 engine in it. I believe it has the L3 rear axle code, which is the 3.31 gear ratio. He has recently lifted it a couple inches and replaced the OEM 30 and a half inch tires with some 32 inch Nitto ridge grapplers. So in doing so, he asked me if I would be interested in doing a re-gear to get his mechanical levers back. He bought some, we got some cryogenically treated 411 Yukon gears for it. And then I've also purchased a full rebuild kit. It only has 35,000 and change on it. But while we're in there, we're going to actually replace the carrier bearings, pinion bearings, and might as well do the axle bearings and seals out on the outer tubes as well. So stay with me, and we're going to tear this apart and do a re-gear. I'm going to show you the tools that I use, the techniques that I use to ensure long life and proper gear setup. Okay, so I mentioned I'm going to pull the brakes apart. I failed to mention that when I pulled it in here, when I first put it on the lift, first thing I did was I went ahead and put the brakes, emergency brakes in particular, but I went ahead and put the brake system into service mode. The way you do that on these is you turn the key to the on position, simultaneously push down, so that the release position down on the park brake switch. At the same time, you push all the way to the floor and accelerator pedal, turn the key to the off position, and then back to the on position within about 5 seconds. And then you'll see it go through. You'll actually hear the actuator work, and then you'll see on the dash, it'll pop up, say, park brake or brake in service mode or something to that effect. Then you'll know that the brakes are in the service mode. All right, so go ahead and zip these couple of caliper bolts out. Go ahead and hang the caliper to where it won't be hanging by the hoses. There we go. I'll keep it there. And we'll go ahead and pull the bracket off. All right, just finished taking off the caliper bracket. Caliper brackets out of the way, set that aside. Rotor may or may not choose to come off. There we go. Rotor's off. Let's go ahead and zip that last bolt out. Almost caught it. Okay, this is the solvent tank. And when you're setting up your dial indicator, you want to actually be perpendicular to the tooth. You don't want to be at an angle. 12, right on the money. Okay, I think it's pretty accurate to say that's 12 thousandths. Okay, so let's pull the axle shafts now. Now this is a C-clip axle. Those of you who are familiar with the Ford 9-inch, they actually hold the axle shafts in from a support retainer out on the outer axle flanges. On a C-clip, on the end of the axle shaft, you have a groove with, it's just what it says, a C-clip going around it. And what holds that in, you can see this shaft right here. If you turn it, that shaft, I hope this is showing up, that shaft goes all the way through, and at the end is the axle shafts. Turn it a little bit more, and you'll see right here, there's a pin. It's threaded on this outer section, and the inner section is a hardened, it's all hardened, but the inner piece is a pin that holds that shaft in place. The threads are out here in the carrier. Needless to say, that fastener did not want to come out of there with the dam without a little persuasion. So I will definitely be picking up a new pin from my local Ford dealer. They put anti-seize on, or not anti-seize, thread locker on these, and I usually can heat up the area and get it to pull out. That one wasn't budging, and I actually ended up breaking a socket on it. So I had to hit it with a little zap of the air hammer to get it out. So, and it did, oh, let's see, that shows, it did mar the edge right there. So I'll pick up a new one of these pins. It's usually a good idea to replace them anyway, but seldom does most people do it. Some of the older kits actually used to come with a new retaining bolt. So now there's the pin that slides out, and hopefully, so you got to kind of keep it at a certain angle so you can clear the housing there. There's no abnormal wear or anything, so that looks good. Now I'll turn it a little bit more and you can see. So now you don't want to turn it too far because you can actually rack the side gear, the spider gears and the side gears out of there. It's not the end of the world. It's just sometimes they're a little problematic to put back in, and make sure you get the shims underneath there. So here, see if I get a screwdriver and point to it. Here's the end of the axle shaft. Right here's that retainer. So I am going to push. Actually, I'm going to do this side. See, I'm standing on this side of the vehicle. So I'll push in on that. Now I will grab and figure out what it is with my magnet. Grab my magnet. Bingo. There's the C-clip. See? It's a C. Hence, C-clip axle. Now you just go ahead and pull. Now, also you want to put out on these outer tubes, I usually sew a couple drip pans down, but you want to put something down because they generally will drip a little bit. Okay, so here's the connector for the locker. Gonna go in and squeeze that. Just connect the connector, put it up out of the way there. Pull out the 8mm head, so it's probably a 6mm actual fastener. There we go. Walk it out of there real gentle like. Pull the connector out there, and there's a connector on the inside of the housing free. After a night of delay here, we're back at pulling this carrier out. I went to grab my adapter plates for these rear ends, and to be perfectly honest with you, I was those adapter plates I had built probably 25 plus years ago when I first got really heavily into, probably 25, 28 years ago when I started racing and doing a lot of rear ends for myself and friends, other racers, so forth. I hurried and knocked out I bought the case spreader. Most of them it fits directly, but on some of them the case spreader's too wide, so you need to come in here and pick up a couple other attachment points in order to spread the case apart. Well, I had thrown together I'm embarrassed to say, but it was a rather crude adapter plate set that would grab these points and allow the case spreader to pull them apart. Well, last night I went to grab those out of the toolbox, and I was pretty embarrassed by them. I didn't want to show those on camera. And granted, they worked, but they were a version of my very early days and weren't exactly something I was proud of. So I took a couple hours and knocked out some nicer adapter plates here and took the time to properly measure them out, set the pattern, the dimensions and everything up on the mill, and indicated them in. And so there's a point here in the case and then 2 cover bolts. So I machined this pin that goes in and picks up that point in the case, and then 2 bolts that'll get tightened down here. And then I need to go behind that. And then at that point, the spreader will go onto the rear end here and actually pick up these 2 points, and that's actually the point where it's going to pull the case apart. So like I said, I just grabbed some steel out of my drawer. And after I got everything drilled and the pins welded in and everything, I took a little bit of bluing, some cold bluing, and just daubed it on there to make it look a little nicer. So, okay, at this point I'm going to grab the case spreader and we'll put it in there and we'll give this thing a test run. Now there are some little locking tabs that they make that come off here to hold them in. I've never used them, but they do make those. Shoot, sorry, I thought the camera was still on. Once I got the pins adjusted out a little bit, I didn't like the way it was rocking on there, so I adjusted the pins out a little bit, got it to sit better, put some tension on it. I've got a dial indicator sitting up here now on one of the tubes as I'm spreading it. So as a general rule of thumb, you don't want to spread these cases any more than about 15 thousandths. Generally, they only have about 10 thousandths of preload, which will give you 6 to 8 inch-pounds of rotating preload. So if I've got it on one tube here, and then the case is on there spreading, I'm only going to go about 7 to 8 thousandths on it, because I'm only measuring one side of the ring gear. So that being said, there's 6. I'm gonna try that. What I'll do is I'll unbolt the carrier bolts, and it should come right out. That's 6 thousandths on the 1 axle tube, so theoretically that should be about 12 thousandths is what I've spread. The factories usually do a pretty good job of putting preload on these things. Oh, almost forgot. Another practice I like to do, and a lot of times these have got them already, is put a mark of some sort, whether it be a center punch, something to score on the caps to determine which side. And I don't see anything immediately jumping out at me, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and put a notch, there, not a notch, a mark there and there on the cap, and then I'm going to do 2 on the right side, and I'll do it upper so I know how that's orientated going back on. A lot of times I'll get these off and I'll see where they've marked them from the factory or whatever, but I still like to do it before. So there's the left cap. Now, this is where you want to be careful because where you've got the case spread, this could very easily allow this carrier to just fall out. So put a hand up in there, hold it. Get the cap out of the way. I'm an idiot, I didn't thread that one out all the way. And go ahead and, oh, it's still in there pretty good. So if it's in there that tight, you can pretty much bank on the fact that you probably wouldn't have gotten it out of there without spreading the case. Now, there's also going to be some shims on either left and right side. Keep those orientated because I like to measure those, and that gives me a good starting point for reassembly. So I've got the left side over here with my pinky, and trying to get this side. There we go. And I got this side here with this carrier bearing. So now over to the bench. Okay, at that point I'm going to go ahead and release the tension on the case spreader. No sense in sitting there holding tension on it when it doesn't need to be. And that way it'll allow me to get everything clean, get the pinion out, the pinion nut off. Okay. Pinion nuts removed. Now we'll see if we can just get lucky here. Yeah, not going to get lucky there. There's a puller on the input yoke. Hopefully that's showing up okay. There we go. Okay, let's get the puller off of there. That actually didn't fall in. Take a chunk out of my concrete or out of my foot. So, okay, yep, drive flange is off and the pinion's out. The crush sleeve come out with the pinion because it's on the back side. So we've got, what we've got to have left there is a seal and the outer pinion bearing. So we'll go ahead and get a chisel up underneath here. I know I've got one here in my cart somewhere. There's no easy way really to get these seals out. You're not going to save it. You're going to get another one. Actually, one come in the kit, but I still don't like to just completely mangle them if I don't have to. Generally working your way around them. It's enough to get them moving. Yeah, so that's already working its way out. Okay. There's the seal. And you should have a washer, yep, slinger washer, and then the outer pinion bearing. So then the only thing left in there should be the inner pinion bearing race and the outer pinion bearing race. And they actually, they look like got a little bit of wear on them, but they're not brindled or spalling or anything like that. So those are in good shape. So, and there again, those will be replaced for removing. As well. I really like, hope this is showing up. I really like these snap-on race removal tools. They're convex on the outer edges, so they're ovaled, and it allows you to go in and make more surface contact than just a regular, like a quarter or a 3/16 punch drift. So these allow a little more surface contact to make contact with the race. And you do want to drive races out walking side to side, or you'll get them cocked in there crooked. And not only you damage the race, you could damage the bore that the race resides in. So just walk them out a little bit. You can kind of feel them, how far they're progressing. And that's precisely what I didn't want to have happen. I wanted to try to catch it. But anyway, there's the inner pinion race. Now we'll go to the other side and see if we can drive this sucker right on into the camera. How's that sound? The owner had asked if I look and see if the differential had a magnet in the bottom, which it does not. So in that event, he asked me if I would incorporate one into the differential cover. So I was just test fitting, kind of looking to make sure you want to clear the ring gear. I wanted to put it more in this void area here on the carrier, but also I wanted to get it as low to the bottom as possible. So that seems to be about the magic location. So we'll go ahead and hit the center, mark the center of each 4 areas. Then I'll join those, and that'll be the center of where I drill to incorporate this magnetic plug, or magnetic plug. That way at least, I mean, he could drain most of it out, not all of it, but most, all but the bottom, probably inch, 3/4 of an inch, and also be able to collect any debris that swims around in there. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this, drill it, and then we'll move over. I got a couple of little things real quick to weld, so I figured I'd incorporate all the welding at one time. So we'll move over to the welding table and weld this bung in. The bung is welded in. It's cooled a little bit here now. I'm just checking to make sure it's not rocking. I kind of skipped around while I had something else to weld also, so I was kind of skipping around. Now, if you'll remember when I was pulling this cover off, there was a couple spots on this side and a couple spots on this side where I'd gotten the chisel underneath. Now is the time, one there, one there, one there. Now is the time where you're going to want to take and knock those edges down flat. so they're not standing proud and holding that cover. Actually, there's a couple other burrs around the edge there as well. Oh, here's the other two. There's the other two over here. And actually a couple of burrs all the way around. I'm just going to take and run this file all the way around this perimeter. All right, that should conclude the blasting. Of the differential cover. That turned out pretty good. You know, while I'm blasting this, I'm sitting here thinking about things, and I realized I'm working on a Ford, and I realized that back in high school, or actually just out of high school, my wife and I were just dating, and a good friend of mine from high school that we raced with and drug the boulevard with and truck pulled with and all these things. He's recently passed away, but he was a great guy, and the fact that his wife and my wife were friends at the time we were hanging around, and I think it was my wife that introduced him to his wife. But anyway, that's beside the point. He come from a big Ford family. Ford. He worked at a garage in high school. I worked at an auto parts store through high school. His older brother, who also became a close friend of mine, Ford mechanic, probably one of the best mechanics, probably one of the two best mechanics I've ever known. He and my old boss Rich were two of my mentors that kind of helped shape me into the person I am today, as far as my passion for automotive, for tools, doing things correctly, not just cobbing things together, but really doing things systematically and properly. These were a couple of my mentors. But anyway, I remember Wayne and I were up on the mountains with our girlfriends riding ATVs, and he had an axle shaft break on his Ford 9-inch. So we left the girls there with the vehicles while we took mine down, dropped our trailer, went over to his brother's house, who had a garage in the back of his house, who did, like I said, Ford, I'm going to say a Ford nut. I mean, this guy eats, sleeps, drinks Fords. Very knowledgeable. I like him anyway, besides the fact that he likes Fords. But anyway, we used to banter back and forth about things. But anyway, he had this, it wasn't huge. It was a modest-sized detached garage in his backyard. But I remember this has been the first time that I had walked into this shop. And my wife and I had been dating for about 6 months, and it was getting pretty serious. We hadn't mentioned the M word yet, but we were leaning that way. And anyway, so we went over to a friend of mine's brother's house to see if he had an axle shaft and whatnot. So we go walking in, and he had two vehicles in there that he was working on. He did a lot of side work. He was a mechanic during the day, did a lot of side work at night. And here it was on a Saturday night, and it was well past dark. And he was in there wrenching on some cars for a couple of clients. And I remember walking into this detached shop behind his house and thinking, holy hell, this guy had, I mean, this was more well equipped than I've seen professional businesses. And I had an uncle and cousins and stuff that had an automotive repair business. But this shop was immaculate. Inside, out, the yard of the house, everything. But I remember he had, I believe it was a Matco toolbox at the time. He had a snap-on bead glass beading cabinet. And I remember he dug through his pile of stuff there that was very well organized, I might add. But he pulled out a Ford 9-inch axle shaft, had the correct spline count, and he was rattling off the specs to this friend of mine, Wayne and myself. And I just remember being in awe of how anybody could have that kind of knowledge in their head. And he was working on a car for somebody. He took time to break away to go find these parts. and it had just a slight bit of surface rust on the flange. And I remember him bringing it over to his blasting cabinet, putting it in there and bead blasting the flange to clean it up so he could press a new bearing on and give it to us so we could go back and put it in his Bronco and get it down off the mountain. And I remember that's the first time I'd ever seen a blasting cabinet, glass beading cabinet. And I'm thinking, wow, this guy's got blasting cabinet, he had a hydraulic press, he had a nice big toolbox, he had all these professional tools and equipment in his home shop. And I just remember thinking that made such an impression upon me. And I remember when we went back up, got back up on the mountain, put his Bronco back together, and this guy had some nice vehicles. He had I remember he had an older Ford, I think it was like a 78-ish or so, F-150 that he had put a full float rear axle under it, and 8 lug knuckles out, and he had a 351, I believe at the time, or earlier, that he had turbocharged, played around with that. Like I said, this is back in the early 80s, mid 80s. Probably 85, 87. And then he had put a 460 in it with a C6, and this truck, to look at it, it looked bone stock other than a few inches of lift. But when you started walking around and looking at it, you realize, holy crap, this is a half-ton short bed that he's got 3/4-ton axles under it, 460, C6, and it looked like it just rolled off the showroom floor. And even Wayne's Bronco, his was the same way. He had a 460 in it with a C6, and it was and 3/4-ton axles under it, after, of course, the 9-inch that had just broken. But I just remember that made such an impression upon me, enough to where when I got back to the mountain, we got the Bronco put back together and everything, and was starting to come down off the mountain. My wife was in the vehicle, well, like I say, girlfriend at the time, but we were driving back down, and she said, was he able to find all the parts? I says, yeah. His brother had all the parts in his shop, and I says, I got to tell you, this guy's shop is immaculate. And I says, and I finally figured out my passion and my quest in life, and it is to have a well-equipped, fully appointed shop in our backyard. And I remember my wife going, oh, our backyard? And I'm like, yeah, in our backyard, we are going to have a shop that I can do anything and everything in that shop, have all the tools and equipment, and more importantly, the knowledge how to use them. And that I just remember that made such an impression upon me. But every time I use this blasting cabinet, I think about that, because I'd never seen a glass beading cabinet up until that point. And this gentleman had one in his garage at home. And I remember when I was starting to do a lot of work on street rods, muscle cars, when we were racing and playing around with the truck poles and everything. I remember thinking I wanted to get some way. I was tired of sanding little brackets down, and so this was the first piece of brand new equipment that I remember, substantial equipment that was a substantial amount of money, that I bought from, this is the Mac 24 by 36, but I remember our local Mac dealer at the time, I had him look it up, I had him find it for me, and I bought this. So this is literally probably 34, maybe 35 years old, and it's one of my most treasured pieces of equipment, because it was the first piece of new shop equipment that I had really bought, and the fact that what drove me to buy this. So every time I use this, I kind of have that memory in the back of my head, and the fact that I'm actually working on a Ford kind of almost makes it double special today. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that little story. It's irrelevant to the rear end, to the gear swap, but I was just using this and it made me think of it. So enough down memory lane. Let's get back to work. Let's go over and I'll throw a coat of paint on this. I've actually had really good luck with the Eastwood Extreme chassis paint, so I'm going to throw a coat of that on this, wipe it down with acetone first, throw a coat of paint on this, let it cure while we go over and start tearing gears apart. Just as important as putting gears together, you want to make sure you don't have any leaks. So I prefer to use these old plastic gasket removers. These work good for removing RTV. They do so, even, I generally in aluminum and things like that, I just do it by hand with a razor, because abrasives can actually roll the edge of your holes, on aluminum in particular, but on cast I really haven't had that problem. So I'll breathe over this, get this all cleaned up like I already have on cast. But aluminum, I generally, and even at this, I went over the majority of it with my razor blade to get it as clean as possible and hold it flat. And you're gonna, where this is machined, you can see some of this, it's a little coarser machining, so there was some areas where I couldn't get the RTV out with the razor blade, but I prefer to kind of do it old school. There's a lot of, like I said, if you've got a square hole, like say a cylinder head for example, and you've got an aluminum block, and you hit it with something abrasive, you're gonna roll that edge. Now that head gasket is not gonna be properly supported and clamped directly between those two surfaces. So I prefer to do it old school with the razor blade, and then hit it with, like I said, this cast. I just use those plastic wheels, they work well. And then also I had a couple little nicks from where I hit it with the chisel, here, here, and here. I took a flat file and just hit those, knocked those little burrs down. So this is all prepped and cleaned and ready for reassembly. And you want to make sure you're driving that brace in straight, so bounce around to make sure it's not going in at an angle. And you can kind of watch the flange out here where the casting tapers in, and if you see it smaller on one side or bigger on the other, then you know you're going in crooked. So move around. Oh, you hear the tone change? That's solid. That's usually an indication. Now, the other thing I'll do is I'll take a 90-degree pick and I'll go in the back side and make sure I don't feel a void between the back machine surface and the race. If you do have a void there, over time, because when you set these up, you're going to be setting up that preload. So if over time there's a gap there, that will actually move around on you, and basically that pinion depth is going to change. So all your hard work, everything you've done, will be for naught, because you're going to end up trashing a ring and pinion and possibly bearings. So everything's good there. Now I'll go around to the front, the outer pinion, and drive it in. This one the same way. You want to make sure everything's clean down there on that mating surface. Make sure there's no foreign material, because that'll do the same thing. That'll keep that bearing race standing proud up off that machine surface. So the first little bit of these going in is usually the trickiest, because you're trying to square that up going in. I don't think I'm there yet, but I think I'm getting close. Yeah, I'm getting close. There's a tone change. Evidently I wasn't as close as I thought I was. These outer seals can sometimes be a bugger to get out, especially where looks like these have been glued in. So I've gone around and just kind of folded the edge in a little bit. Then I'll usually grab my vice grips and I put my homemade little adapter tool in there to use on my slide hammer. Thread the slide hammer on, usually a couple pops, well, or one, and it comes right out. Oh yeah, the light went dead. So, okay, so once the seal is out, you're going to want to use the correct tools on these. These are they just kind of pivot in. I can't remember if I showed this or not. They go into the bearing, like so. So you'll want to slide that in. Make sure it flips flat, catches the back of the bearing, centered up. Just snug that down a little bit. And I had to grab my little 2.5 pounder, or 3 pound, I'm not sure which that is, slide hammer. Didn't cut the mustard, so I had to bring out the big gun. So this is my OTC 5 pounder with the 5/8 shaft rather than the 1/2 inch. Yeah, I think that's a 2.5 or 3 pounder. But anyway, it didn't cut the mustard. There we go. Bingo. And the bearing's out. All right, reverse procedure now. So let's go in and wipe this out a little bit. Make sure you get all the previous sealant, RTV, and everything out of the way. Now, I've got I have a specific set of drivers here that I purchased a few years back that has been absolutely phenomenal. It's made by Arizona Transmission and Machine. So it has a series of these different colors, different lengths, different diameters, and then you have a driving head. These work great for installing bearings either on a hydraulic press or putting this end on and having to hammer them in. So let's go ahead and get this ready for assembly. Now I've just got a little bit of assembly lube here. You can use about anything, but I just put a little bit of assembly lube on the bearing to help it glide into position a little easier. And then I will wipe that assembly lube out so it's not there when the seal's going in, so the seal goes in dry, and I'll put a little bit of sealant around the let's see. Okay, bearings in. Now we'll get the seal, do the same. Now before I do that, I will put a little bit of gear oil in that bearing and roll it around, then wipe it one last time and put the seal in. So let me get the seal and get it prepped. Right. Put a little bit of gear oil in there. After I rebuild a rear end and I'm bringing it out for a test drive, I go slow for the first little bit to make sure that fluid or that differential fluid gets worked out to the outside bearings. Sometimes, depending on what it is, sometimes I'll actually even, once I fill the differential, I'll put a floor jack under one side, tip it up, then the other side, tip it up, and flow some oil out to the outer ends of the tubes there. So, okay, there's the, here at the bench, I like to just take and put a little bit of grease, and the grease will dissolve as soon as the fluid starts hitting it. But I like to put a little bit of grease to act as a shock absorber around that spring on the back side, and that helps keep that spring in place so that as you're tapping the seal in, it's not, it doesn't bounce that spring out of there. Then my sealant of choice seems to be the GMES, and this tube's no, there might be. Yep, there we go. I like the GMES. It's just their, well, the ES stands for engine sealant, but it's just a good all-around engine sealant. That seems to be my sealant of choice. Been using it for about, oh hell, probably 15 years now. It seems to be my favorite. I use it on pretty much everything. Transfer cases. It reminds me a lot of the old Yamabond, and 3Bond made one called 1104 that we used on motorcycle cases, and it kind of reminds me of that. So, like I said, just a thin, you don't want a lot on, just a thin layer. Okay, let's go back over to the vehicle. Get it started in there. And there we go. Clean a little bit of sealant off the tool. Off the seal. Okay. Now, one last step before I forget. Is I'll take a little bit of Seal Glide and I just put it around the seal to help as the shaft's going in, it doesn't drag on it. Helps the shaft slide smoothly through it. Okay, now the axle housing is ready to accept all the other components as soon as we get them swapped over. Remove the crush sleeve, make sure that it's not damaged or anything, but you just want to remove it. And then I usually just make sure, as I'm pulling things apart, I like to compare them to the new parts, so I make sure I have everything. Off camera, I went ahead and opened up the new ring and pinion, made sure everything was right with it. So now, when it comes to pulling this pinion, this inner pinion bearing off, you can use a, these are called a bearing splitter. You can use something like this and put underneath there, put it in the press and press it off. This works quite well, actually. I did this for many years. You can cut them off because you're not going to use them again, but you will need the shims located underneath. Or a few years ago, I bought this tool, and it's just like a clamshell. It goes around the bearing, and then this sits over it and kind of holds everything. Whoop, forgot the other part. Then this piece goes down in. So the theory is, this piece goes under the bearing, that piece captures there, and then the shaft drives down on the end and pulls the bearing up off the pinion. Okay. Now go ahead and put that on. And this just has to be, this just needs to be snug is all. It doesn't need to be really tight. All you're trying to do is prevent that from coming off. And then go ahead, thread this down onto the end of the pinion. And the bearings removed, just like so. So there's the inner pinion bearing off. Set that over out of the way. And while I've got the tool out, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the carrier. So you'll have a similar setup here. Now on this, on the carrier, you can't drive down through here, so you'll want to use some kind of a spacer. This may or may not fit down in there. Yeah, it's close. That'll probably work. Yeah, that's a little too big, but yeah, that's a little too big there. Now here you want to be real careful because you actually have your wire and your plug here for your locker. So be cautious of that. Underneath there we go. Okay, now the same thing. And again, you'll want to be rather careful, make sure there's nothing pinching that wiring. One of the spider gears fell out, crap, so it rolled around the side there. So we'll have to put that back in. Side gears aren't the end of the world, but it's best if you don't let them fall out because then you gotta put them back in. So there's carrier bearings. That's the left side carrier bearing. Now on some setups, the shims to just the side to side are actually under the carrier bearings. Most of them are not. Most of them are to the outside, like this one is. You have the bearing, the race. Right there, the race, then the shim on the outside between the case and the carrier. But like I said, there are some as you pull this off, you'll want to be careful you don't damage those shims because you'll want to start there as a reference. But this particular style is not that way. So now also with your spider gears, might be kind of hard to see, but there is a very small. This is machined high carbon steel. Be careful with that. Don't get grit up underneath there because that'll ruin that in a hurry. So set that aside where It's not going to get damaged or get debris or anything on it. There's the other one. There's the side gears, same way. That's basically your thrust bearing, your thrust washer rather. It's got like a hydraulic lock with the fluid on it. But you can kind of see there's the side gear. The side gear is actually what has your splines in it for the axle shafts where they come in. They sit in here like this. You have two of them opposing each other. And then the spider gears sit like so. So the spider gears are what actually allow your differential to differentiate. As you're going around a turn, the outside one needs to spin more revolutions than the inside one. And this setup is what allows those to do so. When it's locked, basically this system locks up. It prevents those spider gears from walking around the side gears and therefore acts like a spool. So it's locked up. There's no slippage from side to side. To unbolt the ring gear, get ready to put the new ring gear in place. See if this will come down with a few taps or not. I think it will. And it's got about 1/8 of an inch gap, but it's coming. There it goes. Okay. All right, pinion, ring gear, that's what determines your gear ratio. And for the most part, 35,000 miles, it has a decent, well, it should, it's factory, it's OEM. Ford had better know what the hell they're doing. But it's got a nice wear pattern and there's no chipped teeth or anything. Everything's nice and smooth. So now technically you could reuse this. Before I assemble the ring gear to the carrier, I like to take just a stone. You can use a flat file, nice machinist file, but I just usually will use a stone. Make sure and breathe across everything and make sure there's no burrs. You know, these can get dropped in a manufacturing or a packaging environment. So any little raised burr is going to keep that ring gear from mating flat to that carrier, and therefore it's going to stand off of it. And a couple of things are more likely going to happen. Number one, you're going to chase backlash all over the place, because in best practices are you should take backlash readings in a couple, three, you know, at least 180, but maybe even 120 or 90 degrees in relation to several areas around the gear. But so if that gear is off on one side, it's going to be tight on one side or even making contact and loose on the other. Then, so you've torqued everything down. Now over time, if you do get past the backlash portion and you're putting it together, it's going to be running in there against that ring gear at an angle like this, because that part is holding up off of there. So then once that flattens out and goes and sits back in, you're going to have excessive clearance, number one, and number two, your ring gear bolts aren't going to be tight. So you really want to make sure that everything is flattened off. So I will take a stone around not only just the ring gear, but also the case to ensure there's no burrs. So the ring gear's ready. The pinion looks like it's ready. Now, as I pulled the bearing off, of the pinion, you're going to notice there's a shim under. Sometimes there's two, but generally there's at least one. This is the factory shim stack for the pinion. That's generally where I'll start as far as putting things back together. So just for shits and grins here, we want to make sure that's 2-inch journal and a 2-inch journal. Okay. Then I'm going to take that shim and measure it as well. I'm going to say it's probably around 30, 35 maybe. $25, $35, $3. So 0.0353. So that's a 35 thousandths shim. That's where we're going to start. And the kit does supply extras. Looks like there's a couple of different thicknesses. They usually provide like a 5, 7. So there's a 19. There's a couple different thickness shims. And I'll take you over to my drawer and show you my stash real quick. And if I need any additional, there's my assortment of axle shims. A lot of Jeep stuff in here, but I've got a little bit of everything. Some 12-inch, 10-inch, or not 12-inch, 10-bolt, 12-bolt GMs from back when we was racing. Dana 44s, Dana 30s, a little bit of everything in here. So I've got a good variety if I don't have enough, and then I always just keep those, and I just keep adding to. So here's the case cleaned up, or the carriers rather. And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to take the stone and just lightly, actually, there are some little, excuse me about that, there are some little pieces of hard, I don't know if it's something that's been cooked on from over years, like oil, how it gets baked on there. I'm not quite sure if that's what that is or what, but there are some little pieces coming off of there, so I'll just continue to work my way around. Not really seeing anything jumping out at me though. Alright, so now one thing I wanted to show you, I don't know if this will show up or not, but if you look down inside, you see teeth on this side gear here. And then you've got the two side gears that come out. One has teeth, one does not. So the one with teeth is going to go in that side, and that's what actually, when this coil, so you really, I mean, you could get these messed up and then the locker wouldn't work, but you really can't get these messed up or swapped around if you're paying attention. But here's your coil. So when this is energized, 12 volts, it pulls that coil forces those set of teeth out to lock into these ones, and basically locking that to the case, which locks the two side gears. The spiders can't rotate around, or rotate around this way, walk the side gears. Therefore, both axle shafts are now locked together. So that's how that works. Before I get too carried away here, I am going to put I've got everything cleaned up. Go ahead and this is actually engraved. That's cryogenically treated, and it's not sitting down. So I am going to start a couple of bolts. Just as a guide, you don't want to necessarily draw the gear down with these, but I do like to use a couple of bolts as a guide. I'll use two more. So as I'm popping that ring gear down in, now I've got a bearing heater over here that a lot of times I will use for the ring gears, but where this is cryogenically treated, I don't necessarily want to heat it up, so I will press this on. It looks like it's close, it wants to go, so I'll put it in the press and just press it together carefully. I will more than likely heat up my bearings for the, probably not for the case, they'll press on easy enough, or excuse me, the carrier, but the pinion I'll more than likely will. So let's go ahead and press this ring gear on and get it ready to torque, and I'll show you how I torque those. So I've got the ring gear being supported out here, and I just got a block in here, and this is actually going together very easily. It's not even registering on my pressure gauge as far as pressing this together. So okay. All right, now these get torqued to 80 foot-pounds. So I will show you how I torque. I don't like to push down on those ring gear teeth any more than you have to, but you can press on the case, the carrier assembly, in order to hold it. So I will put that like so. And then basically push this down a little bit, put just a little bit of pressure on it to hold everything, and then it doesn't go anywhere. Now at that point, I'll put some red Loctite on. Actually, it's already got some red Loctite on these, so I'll go ahead and run these down probably grab my ratchet, run them, my cordless ratchet, run them down, and then I'll grab the torque. Yeah, I decided to go ahead and put a little bit of Loctite on these and run them down in. They have a little bit of that tape stuff on them, but I'm going to put just a little bit of liquid thread locker on. These are the new fasteners. You can use the old ones. I have quite a bit in the past, actually, never had a failure. But when the kits come with new ones, I go ahead and put new ones in. Okay, let's go ahead and run these down. Okay, now I'll grab the torque wrench. Set them first to about 40. Actually, I'll probably go to, let me go to 50. 55, we'll start at 55, then we'll jump right to 80. Okay, let's go across in a zigzag fashion. Okay, now jump right up to 80. Damn, eyes are getting old. See, by sandwiching that in there, it's not going anywhere. And this press is heavy enough. It's a 20-ton new gear. It's heavy enough, and you can't really drag it around the shop very easily. So I'll go ahead and, after going around in a cross pattern, just go around them all to make sure I got them. Okay, those are all torqued. I don't like leaving my torque wrenches laying around. These torque wrenches, some of them are 30 years old, and I like setting them off to the side where they're not going to get dropped, and I don't like setting them aside without them being in the case. Okay. All right, that's ready for bearings. Okay, once again, my Arizona transmission and machine bearing press comes in handy. These are the sleeves. You've got different length adapters here, and then you've got a regular driver, or you can use it as a through hole. It's like if you press a pinion bearing, you can press it down over, and you got a through hole. So. Now you want to make sure that actually fits over, so you're not pressing here when you're trying to press the bearing down. And I'm going to have to grab just a little bit more distance here, a little more clearance. Probably a bit much, but you probably go to the longer. We'll make this work. So there's the bearing. Again, like I said, you want to press. Now here you want to press on the inner part of the bearing. You do not want to press on that outer cage. You'll damage it. So this is the I've got I don't know how many selection races in or drivers in there, but I've selected the one that is just the same size basically as this inner race, but will slip over that. So you put that on the first side. Is the easy one to do because you don't have to worry about the other side. So let's go ahead and start that. Go ahead and press the bearing down into place. And it starts and goes down nice and easy. And it's seated. Okay. Now the other side, what you want to do is you do not want to just set it on your arbor plates, because this cage stands slightly proud of this inner lip. So I just usually take I keep an assortment of just miscellaneous odds and ends between shafts and blocks, spacers hydraulic sleeves where the gland packing goes in, old bearings that I've welded together. So I've got an assortment that I keep here right next to my press for a wide variety of things that I'm pressing. Sometimes I got to grab one, take it over to the lathe and machine it to fit, but at least I have something to start with. So now you want to put that on to where you're actually sitting on this machined lip, not sitting. So one way to tell is to get it centered down underneath there, and then go ahead and spin your bearing. If you can spin that bottom bearing, that means you're not sitting on the cage. Then go ahead and drive the other side bearing home. Okay, so there's absolutely, I've got, a couple thousand pounds of pressure there pressing these bearings on, and none of it is touching those bearings. So go ahead and pull that apart. And the carrier, go ahead and put the side gears, the spiders in, and then this is ready to go into the rear axle housing once I get the pinion prepped.